The first thing my manager said was, "Claire, your father is here." It was Friday, October 11th, just before the dinner rush at Cedar and Stone. The kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and thyme, the low hum of prep work, filling the room the way it always did at 5:30. My line cook was finishing the last tray of salmon. Someone laughed near the dish pit. Outside the kitchen doors, the dining room lights were warm and low, the way people in Portland like them when the rain starts coming earlier in the fall. Daniel Ruiz stood in the doorway, holding the reservation tablet against his chest. "My father is here." For a second, I thought he meant someone else, a different father, a man with the same last name, maybe, because my father hadn't spoken to me in 4 years. Not since the afternoon he told me I wasn't welcome in his house in Spokane anymore. He didn't make a reservation, Daniel added carefully. He said you'd understand. My hands were still wet from rinsing parsley. I wiped them slowly on a kitchen towel and looked at him. "Is he alone?" Daniel hesitated. "No, that told me enough." "Where?" "Table 12, he said. "The window." Of course it was. Table 12 was the best table in the restaurant. You could see straight out to Northwest 23rd Avenue, where the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, and people walked past with umbrellas and dogs and takeout bags. I had chosen that table myself when we built the dining room 3 years earlier. The door to the kitchen swung open behind Daniel as a server walked through carrying glasses. "He's with a younger guy," Daniel said quietly. "Looks like family." "Ethan." I didn't ask. I already knew. I untied my apron and folded it over the stainless counter. The movement felt automatic, like muscle memory from another life. "Did he say what he wanted?" I asked. Daniel nodded toward the tablet in his hands. He brought paperwork. Paperwork. For a moment, I didn't move. The kitchen noise kept going around me. Pans, clinking, someone calling for lemons, the steady rush of water in the sink. But it felt like everything had shifted slightly out of place. My father hadn't called in 4 years. Not when I opened the restaurant. Not when Cedar and Stone made the Portland Food Journal's Best New Neighborhood Restaurants list. Not when the winter storm flooded the basement and I spent 2 days moving equipment by myself. But he had shown up tonight, with paperwork. Daniel watched my face, the way people do when they're waiting to see if something will break. "You want me to ask them to leave," he said. I shook my head. "Not yet." The kitchen doors opened and closed behind me as I stepped into the dining room. Cedar and Stone was half full, already the early diners finishing drinks before the rush. The reclaimed cedar walls glowed under the pendant lights. Someone at the bar was talking about the Mariners game, and there he was, Robert Whitaker. My father sat at table 12, like he had been there 100 times, before his gray coat folded neatly over the back of the chair. Across from him sat Ethan, my younger half-brother, leaning back with the same restless energy he'd had since he was a teenager. Between them on the table was a brown legal folder. My father looked up and smiled, like we had just had lunch together last week. "There she is," he said. I stopped at the edge of the table. I didn't sit down. He tapped the folder once with 2 fingers. "You're going to sign over part of this place to your brother tonight," he said calmly, "before you close." And that's when I saw something strange. The papers inside the folder were already tabbed, marked, prepared, like someone had studied my restaurant before walking through the door. For a moment, I didn't answer. The restaurant carried on around us, like nothing unusual was happening. A couple near the bar laughed softly. Someone at table 5 asked their server about the wine list. Outside the window, rain had started falling in thin silver lines against the streetlights. My father waited. He had always been good at waiting when he believed the room belonged to him. The brown folder sat between us on the table, the tabs inside neatly labeled in different colors. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest, studying the dining room like a man evaluating property. I didn't touch the papers. You drove 6 hours for this, I asked. 4, my father corrected calmly. Spokane to Portland is just under 4 if you leave early. He said it the way someone talks about weather. 4 hours. It had taken him 4 hours to show up tonight. It had taken him 4 years to show up at all. I remembered the last time I saw him. It was late August, the kind of dry, eastern Washington afternoon when the air smells like dust and hot asphalt. I was 27 and standing in the kitchen of the house I grew up in on Maplewood Drive in Spokane. My father stood across the counter from me, the same place he used to sit, drinking coffee before work when I was a kid. Ethan had just lost another investment. Some construction deal outside Boise that had collapsed before the first building even went up. And my father wanted me to help, not advice, money, or, more specifically, my credit. You're the only one with a clean financial record, he had said back then. At the time, I was managing a small restaurant in Portland and saving every extra dollar I had. I'm not signing anything, I told him. He stared at me for a long moment, like I had just spoken a language he didn't recognize. Your family, he said finally. So are you, I answered. That was when something in his face changed. You've always been selfish, Claire, he said quietly. You think everything you have belongs to you. It wasn't the worst thing he ever said to me, but it was the last. I left Spokane 2 days later with my car packed full of kitchen knives, notebooks, in the small leather binder where I kept the first sketches for Cedar and Stone. Back then, it wasn't a restaurant. It was an idea scribbled on diner napkins during overnight shifts, farm-to-table food, local farmers, a place where the lighting was warm and the menu changed with the seasons. For the first year in Portland, I slept in a studio apartment above a laundromat and worked double shifts 6 days a week. I applied for loans. Most of them said no. One small investor said maybe. The lease on the building nearly collapsed twice before I signed it. And the entire time, my father never called. Not when I hung the cedar boards on the dining room walls myself. Not when we opened with 6 tables and 2 employees. Not when the Portland Food Journal wrote our first review. 4 years. Not a birthday. Not a holiday. Nothing. Now he sat across from me at my own table like those years had been a scheduling error. Ethan finally leaned forward and picked up his wine glass. Nice place, he said, glancing around the dining room. I said nothing. My father pushed the brown folder slightly closer to me. You've done well, he said. Then he tapped the cover once. And that's exactly why we're here. I looked down at the tabs again. Investor structure, lease terms, operating agreement. Someone had studied my business carefully. When I looked back up, my father was watching me with the calm patience of someone who believed the answer had already been decided. My father opened the folder. He did it slowly, like a man beginning a meeting instead of interrupting dinner service at a restaurant he had never visited before. The tabs inside were neatly arranged, yellow, blue, and red, each marking a section of the document stack. I could see typed pages clipped together, legal language printed in narrow paragraphs. Ethan leaned forward slightly. This won't take long, my father said. The tone was familiar. It was the voice he used when he was explaining something that in his mind had already been decided. He slid the top document toward me. I had a lawyer draft this, he said. Just a simple agreement. I looked down at the first page without touching it. The header read, Equity Transfer Agreement. My father rested his hands on the table, like he had all the time in the world. Your brother needs a fresh start, he said. Ethan shifted in his chair, but didn't interrupt. My father continued. You probably heard about the development project in Boise. I hadn't, but I nodded slightly anyway. The market turned, he said. His partners weren't who they claimed to be. The deal collapsed before the first phase even broke ground. Ethan stared down at the table as he listened. There are investors involved, my father added. People who expect their money back. I finally lifted the first page. The document was written exactly the way business contracts always are: formal, clinical, polite. But the meaning was simple. 20% of Cedar and Stone would be transferred to Ethan Whitaker as a silent partner. 20%, I said quietly. My father nodded. It's temporary. Ethan finally spoke. Just until I get back on my feet. I looked at him. When did you last step foot in this building? I asked. He didn't answer. My father cleared his throat. This isn't about the restaurant itself, he said. It's about collateral. The word hung in the air between us. Ethan needs proof of assets, he continued. Something stable. Something that produces income. And my restaurant does that, I said. Yes. He said it without hesitation. You're doing well here, Claire. Everyone can see that. He gestured lightly toward the dining room. You have a full house on a Friday night. That kind of stability carries weight with lenders. Lenders. Investors. Collateral. I flipped to the next page. My father had tabs marking the signature lines. He had even highlighted them. You sign tonight, he said, tapping the paper. Ethan gets a silent stake. The investors calm down. Everyone moves forward. I let the page fall back onto the table. And if I don't? I asked. My father folded his hands. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he leaned forward slightly. Claire, he said calmly, you remember Marcus Chen, don't you? The name landed like a small stone dropped into water. Marcus Chen. The man who owned the building Cedar and Stone was in. The landlord who had signed my lease 3 years earlier. We went to the same church for years, my father continued. Good man, reasonable. My stomach tightened slightly. My father kept talking. If someone were to call him and raise concerns about the stability of your investors, the structure of your partnership, well, he shrugged lightly. Landlords worry about things like that. I looked down again at the document. There it was again. The same strange detail I had noticed earlier. The tabs weren't random. One of them labeled Lease Structure referenced the exact clauses in my agreement with Marcus Chen. Clauses that were not public. Clauses that only 3 people had ever reviewed. Me, Marcus, and the attorney who helped negotiate the lease. I didn't say anything about that. Not yet. Across the table, Ethan finally spoke again. You built something good here, he said. His tone was almost thoughtful. Which means you can afford to help. I looked up at both of them. My father waited, patient, certain. Like this conversation had only one possible ending. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. The restaurant noise continued around us, like a quiet current moving past a rock in the river. Plates clinked softly in the kitchen. Someone laughed near the bar. Outside the window, the rain had turned steadier, tapping against the glass in a rhythm that almost covered the silence at table 12. My father seemed perfectly comfortable inside that silence. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands over his stomach, like a man waiting for a routine business decision. I looked down again at the contract. 20%. Not a loan, not a favor, ownership. Even if they called it temporary, the language on the page said something different. Partnership stake. Voting rights under certain circumstances. Collateral against debt. I had spent too many nights reading lease clauses and investor agreements over the past 3 years, not to recognize what that meant. If Ethan's creditors ever moved against him, my restaurant could end up tied to his mess. You should read the section with the blue tab, my father said. I didn't move. Take your time, he added. Across the table, Ethan swirled the wine in his glass. You've always been the careful one, he said. You'll see, it makes sense. I kept my face neutral, but inside something had shifted. The tab marked lease structure still bothered me. Those clauses referenced details about my building agreement with Marcus Chen, details I had never discussed with my family, not once. I closed the folder gently. I need a minute, I said. My father nodded as if he had expected that. Of course. Ethan lifted his glass again. We'll be here. I stood and walked back toward the kitchen. The moment the doors swung closed behind me, the air changed. The heat from the stoves hit my face, carrying the smell of seared steak and butter. One of the cooks called out an order number. Someone pushed past me with a tray of roasted vegetables. Daniel was waiting near the prep counter. Well, he asked quietly. I placed the folder on the stainless steel surface. Where did you see these? I asked. Before you came out, he said. Your dad asked if someone could bring a bottle of red. The folder was open for a minute. What caught your eye? Daniel hesitated, then tapped one of the colored tabs. This section. I opened it again. Lease, structure. Daniel lowered his voice. Claire, that clause references your partnership schedule and the investor distribution model. I looked at him. So, he gave me a careful look. I've worked here 3 years, he said. I've never even seen those documents. He wasn't wrong. Most of that information was buried deep in the lease agreement Marcus Chen and I had negotiated. The kind of thing that lived inside legal drafts, not family conversations. How would they know about that? Daniel asked. I didn't answer, because the question had already been forming in my own mind. Outside the kitchen doors, I could see my father through the small glass window. He was sitting exactly the same way, calm, patient, certain, like he had walked into this restaurant already knowing every move that was about to happen. Daniel watched him for a moment. You want me to call security? He asked quietly. I shook my head. No. Then what do you want to do? I closed the folder again. The paper tabs pressed neatly against the edge, like someone had prepared them carefully in advance, which meant this wasn't a conversation they had decided to have on the drive down from Spokane. Someone had done research, real research. I need to make a call, I said. Daniel nodded. You want me to stall them? Yes. How long I thought about the dining room, the rain outside, and the man sitting at table 12, like he owned a piece of my life. Long enough, I said. As Daniel turned back toward the dining room, my phone was already in my hand. There was only one person I knew who would understand exactly what I was looking at. And if I was right about what those documents meant, tonight was about to get a lot more complicated. I stepped into the narrow office behind the kitchen and closed the door. The sound of the restaurant dimmed immediately. Out there, Cedar and Stone was still moving forward, orders, plates, quiet conversations over wine. But in this small room, everything slowed down. The brown folder was still in my hand. I set it on the desk and looked at it for a moment. For 4 years, I had imagined what it would feel like if my father ever came back into my life. I had imagined apologies, awkward conversations, maybe even silence. What I had not imagined was this: contracts, threats, and the quiet assumption that he could still take something from me. My phone was already unlocked. There was only one contact I scrolled to without hesitation: Angela Brooks. Her name sat near the top of my recent calls list, even though the last conversation we'd had was almost 6 months earlier. Angela wasn't just a lawyer. 3 years ago, when I was still negotiating the lease for Cedar and Stone, she had been the one who stepped in after a junior attorney from the investor group nearly buried me in a clause I didn't understand. She had looked at the document for 10 minutes, crossed out half a page, and said calmly, "If you sign this as written, you won't own your restaurant in 5 years." That was the day I realized how much a business wasn't about cooking or customers. It was about paper. I pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then her voice answered. "Angela Brooks. It's Claire Whitaker." A small pause. "Claire," she said, "is everything all right?" I looked down at the folder. "No," I said honestly. "Not really." I explained quickly. My father, the drive from Spokane, the contract, the clause referencing my lease structure. Angela didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then she asked one question. "Is he still there?" "Yes." "Good." The word surprised me. "Good," I repeated. "Yes," she said calmly. "Because it's easier to deal with a situation like this while the people involved are still sitting in the same room." I leaned back in the chair. "He's asking for 20% ownership," I said. "That's what the document says," she replied. "And he threatened to call Marcus Chen if I refuse." Another pause. "I'm about 15 minutes away," Angela said. "You're coming here?" "I was finishing paperwork downtown," she said. "Send me a photo of the first 2 pages of the contract." I opened the folder again and snapped the pictures. My phone buzzed a moment later, confirming they were delivered. Angela spoke again. "Claire." "Yes." "Do not sign anything tonight." "I wasn't planning to." "Good," she said. "Because if the clause you mentioned is written the way I think it is, your father's lawyer may have made a very interesting mistake." I frowned. "What kind of mistake?" "The kind we'll discuss in person." She paused. "Until I get there, keep them at the table." How I thought about the man sitting calmly at table 12, about the rain on the windows, about the years of silence that had ended tonight with a demand for ownership. "I'll figure something out," I said. Angela's voice softened slightly. "You built that restaurant yourself, Claire," she said. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The call ended. For a moment, I stayed in the chair, staring at the phone in my hand. Then I stood, picked up the folder again, and walked back toward the kitchen doors. When I stepped into the dining room, my father looked up immediately. Ethan had finished his glass of wine. They were still sitting exactly where I had left them, waiting, expecting the answer they had come to collect. I walked back to the table and set the folder down gently. "All right," I said. My father smiled slightly. "I knew you'd see reason." I pulled the chair out across from him. "Before I sign anything," I said calmly, "I want to understand every detail." For the first time that evening, my father leaned forward. And outside the restaurant windows, the rain kept falling. Angela Brooks arrived 11 minutes later in a charcoal coat, still damp from the rain. Daniel met her at the host stand and brought her straight through the dining room without drawing attention to it. She didn't look at table 12 when she passed. That was one of the things I liked about Angela. She never performed urgency. She just carried it quietly. I stood when she reached me near the hallway to the office. "Angela," I said. She gave me a brief nod and held out her hand for the folder. "No introductions," she said softly. "Not yet." I handed it to her. My father noticed her then. I saw it in the slight pause of his expression, the quick recalculation behind his eyes. He knew she wasn't a server, and he knew she wasn't a friend dropping by for dinner. Angela didn't acknowledge him. She simply walked past with me into the office and closed the door. The room suddenly felt smaller, with both of us in it. She laid the folder open on the desk and read fast flipping pages with the flat edge of her thumb. I stood across from her and watched her face, waiting for some sign. When it came, it was small, a single exhale through her nose. "Well," she said, "your father's attorney is either sloppy or arrogant. Which one is worse?" "In business," she asked. "Usually arrogant." She turned the contract so I could see the marked sections. "This isn't a temporary equity transfer, the way he presented it," she said. "It's structured as a conditional membership assignment with debt exposure." I looked at the page. In English, she pointed to the paragraph beneath the blue tab. "If Ethan takes 20% ownership and his creditors move against him, they're not just coming after his interest. They can force disclosure, challenge distributions, and drag your operating agreement into court. Even if you win, your restaurant gets tied up in the process." A cold, steady pressure moved through my chest. So this could damage the business, even if I never miss a payment, never do anything wrong, never agree to anything except this one signature. "Yes," Angela said. "That's exactly what it could do." I sat down slowly. Outside the office wall, I could hear the muted rise and fall of the dining room. Silverware, voices. A burst of laughter from the bar. My restaurant was still functioning. Orders were still going out. Meanwhile, 10 feet away, one pen stroke could put all of it inside someone else's mess. Angela turned another page. "And here," she said, "is where it gets interesting." She tapped the section Daniel had noticed. "Lease structure. This language references a private addendum to your building lease," she said. "A very specific one. The rent step adjustment and the investor cure provision." I looked at her. "That isn't public." "No," Angela said. "It isn't." The words sat between us. I thought of Marcus Chen, of the day we signed the lease, of the 3 copies on the table, the blue ink, the long silence, before I finally put my name on the last page. Only Marcus, Angela, and I had seen that addendum. "No one in my family had access to this," I said. Angela closed the folder halfway and looked at me directly. "Then your father didn't come here with a guess," she said. "He came here with information." I felt something in me harden at that. Not anger exactly. Anger was too hot, too fast. This was colder than that. Cleaner. "What do I do?" I asked. Angela was quiet for a moment. "You have 2 choices tonight," she said. "You can refuse immediately and have them leave, or you can keep talking and learn how much they think they know." I already knew which answer she expected, but it wasn't hers. It was mine. For 4 years, I had carried the silence they gave me like it was something I was supposed to survive privately, gracefully, without making anyone uncomfortable. I looked down at the contract again. 20%. Collateral. Control. No, not this time. "I'm done being careful for people who weren't careful with me," I said. Angela gave the smallest nod. "Good," she said. "Then go back out there and let your father keep explaining." I stood. At table 12, Robert Whitaker still believed he was conducting a business transaction. He had no idea he was beginning to give one away. When I returned to table 12, my father was watching the kitchen doors. He straightened slightly when he saw me coming back. Ethan had ordered another glass of Cabernet. The empty bottle sat near the candle, in the middle of the table, the wax flame flickering against the rain-streaked window behind them. My father smiled again. "That was quick," he said. I set the folder back on the table and sat down across from him. "Sorry about the wait," I said, calmly. "Dinner rush?" He nodded toward the contract. "You've had time to think." "I have." For a moment, none of us spoke. Then, I slid the folder toward him instead of opening it. I just have a couple questions first. My father leaned back again, confident. Of course. Ethan crossed his arms. Ask. I looked directly at my father. When you said earlier that the family invested in me, I said slowly, what exactly did you mean by that? He frowned slightly. What do you mean you said I owe the family? I continued. For everything that went into raising me. My father waved one hand dismissively. Well, that's obvious. Humor me. He sighed. We paid for your education, your food, your housing, everything until you were 22. That's how parenting works, I said. Ethan shifted in his chair. This isn't about childhood, he muttered. I ignored him. What about the college fund, I asked. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. What about it? The account Mom set up when I was 10. The table went very quiet. Ethan glanced at my father. My father cleared his throat. That money went toward family needs. Which needs? He didn't answer immediately. Claire, he said carefully, this conversation isn't relevant to the agreement. It is to me. The rain outside had grown heavier. Water ran down the glass behind him in long, silver streaks. My father's patience began to thin. You're changing the subject. No, I said quietly. I'm clarifying it. Ethan leaned forward. That money helped launch my first development deal, he said suddenly. My father shot him a quick look, but it was already out. I nodded slowly. The Boise project. No, Ethan said. The Spokane property group before that. I watched him. That deal collapsed too, I said. Ethan didn't answer. My father folded his hands on the table. That was years ago, he said. 10, I replied. That money helped your brother start a business. That money, I said, was my college fund. My father's voice hardened. And your brother needed it more. The words landed quietly. No shouting, no raised voices, just the simple arithmetic he had always believed. I sat back in my chair. Around us, the restaurant continued moving. Through the evening, plates were delivered to nearby tables. Someone at the bar was discussing weekend travel plans. Life continued. But something in the air at table 12 had shifted. Ethan looked uncomfortable now. You're making this dramatic, he said. I'm making it accurate. My father shook his head. You've always had this habit of rewriting the past. I held his gaze. No, I said calmly. I just stopped pretending it didn't happen. For a moment, none of us spoke again. Then my father leaned forward. Enough, he said. He tapped the contract again. You can revisit old family arguments later. Tonight, we're here for something simple. His voice dropped slightly. You sign the agreement. And if I don't, I asked again. This time, he didn't hesitate. I call Marcus Chen. The words came out colder now. Your landlord deserves to know who he's renting, to my father continued. Someone with unstable investor relationships might make him nervous. Ethan nodded faintly beside him. Buildings change tenants all the time, he added. The threat was no longer subtle. For the first time since they arrived, the weight of it landed fully in the center of the table. I looked at the contract again. Then I closed the folder slowly. You're willing to risk my entire business, I said quietly. My father didn't blink. You're willing to risk your family. For a moment, the room seemed smaller. Then I stood up. I need another minute, I said. My father frowned. You've already had one. I won't be long. I picked up the folder and walked back toward the kitchen again. Behind me, I could feel their eyes following. At the prep counter, Daniel looked up as soon as I came through the doors. Well? He asked. I placed the folder down and exhaled. They're escalating, I said. Daniel glanced toward the dining room. Do we need to call someone? I shook my head. Not yet. But for the first time that evening, I could feel the ground shifting under the plan Angela and I had just started building. Because now the threat wasn't theoretical. Now it had a name, Marcus Chen. And my father was ready to use it. Angela was standing exactly where I had left her, beside the desk with the contract open and my lease file pulled halfway out of the drawer. I shut the office door behind me harder than I meant to. He said Marcus's name. I told her. Not as a bluff, as leverage. Angela didn't look surprised. Of course he did. I stared at her. That doesn't bother you? It bothers me, she said. But it doesn't change the math. She turned the contract back toward herself and flipped to the last 3 pages. Her movements were calm, precise, almost boring in the way competence often is. Your father is doing what people like him always do when the first version of control doesn't work, she said. He's escalating to the pressure point he thinks matters most. My lease. Your fear, she corrected. That stopped me. Outside the office wall, the restaurant was still alive. Orders were being called. Plates were landing. Glassware clinked. It was all the proof I needed that Cedar and Stone existed in the world beyond this conversation. But fear had a way of shrinking things down until all you could see was the one hand around your throat. Angela pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and wrote 3 words in block letters. What do they need? She pushed it across the desk. Not what they say they want, she said. What they need. I looked at the page. Ethan needs relief from his creditors. Yes. My father needs control. No, Angela said. Control is how he gets through the day. It's not why he drove here. I was quiet. She tapped the pad with her pen. They need an asset that looks stable enough to calm whoever is breathing down Ethan's neck. That's why they want ownership language. They don't need your restaurant itself. They need the appearance of security. I thought about the tabs, the highlighted clauses, the way my father had kept repeating words like lenders and stability and moving forward. Not family, not reconciliation, security, collateral, time. Angela was watching my face when I finally understood. If they need the appearance of stability, I said slowly, then ownership isn't the only structure. No, she said, it isn't. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thin black folder. Empty forms, blank signature lines, legal paper that looked serious because that was part of what legal paper was for. You don't counter with a refusal, she said. You counter with a framework. I felt the room steady around me. What kind of framework? One that protects your business completely, she said, while letting them believe they're getting what they came for. I looked at her for a long moment. You already have something in mind. Angela gave me the faintest hint of a smile. I usually do. She laid out the logic with the same calm tone she might have used to explain a delivery schedule. If Ethan needed something to show his creditors, there were cleaner ways to create that appearance than giving him real equity. A structured family loan, temporary support, defined repayment terms, documentation tied to him, not to Cedar and Stone. The more she spoke, the clearer the shape became. Not surrender, not a fight, a paper trail. And if they ask questions, I said, then you answer the questions that help you, she replied, and you let your father keep talking. Men like that usually mistake patience for agreement. I glanced down at the original contract again. 20%, silent stake, access through debt. It seemed almost crude now that I could see the edges of it clearly. Angela tore the top page off the legal pad and started outlining bullet points. Loan structure, no equity transfer, personal obligation, proof of need, verification. Then she stopped writing and looked up at me. "There's one more thing," she said. "What if your father wants to use the past as justification? Let him." I frowned. "He already did." "Not enough," she said. "Not clearly. Make him explain the logic out loud. What the family paid for. What was taken. What Ethan was given. What you were expected to absorb." I stared at her. "You want him to say it?" "Yes." There was no heat in her voice, just purpose. Because once a person says their math out loud, she said they usually stop hearing how ugly it sounds. Everyone else doesn't. For a second, I could see the next part of the evening, as if it were already arranged. My father at table 12. The rain against the window, the folder between us. Ethan waiting for rescue, like it was still owed to him. I took a breath and picked up the black folder. "When I go back out there," I said, "I'm not the one being cornered anymore." Angela capped her pen. "No," she said. "Now you're the one setting terms." I opened the office door. The noise of the restaurant rushed back in, around me, warm and steady and real. This time, when I walked toward table 12, I wasn't carrying their contract. I was carrying mine. My father looked at the black folder in my hands and smiled, the way people do when they think they finally worn you down. "There," he said. "That's better." I took my seat again and placed the new folder carefully on the table between us. The candlelight caught the edge of the paper. Outside the window, rain moved down the glass in long, steady lines. Inside, cedar and stone, every table seemed full now. The room had settled into that late evening rhythm I loved most. Less noise, more focus, the clink of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the kind of calm that only came when a place was working exactly the way it was built to work. My father reached for the folder. I put my hand on it first. "I'm not signing your agreement," I said. The silence that followed was small but sharp. Ethan let out one short breath through his nose. My father leaned back in his chair again, as if patience alone would restore the direction of the evening. "Then we're done here," he said. "No," I said quietly. "We're not." I opened the folder and turned the first page toward them. "If what you need is something to show Ethan's creditors," I said, "there's another way to structure it." My father didn't touch the document. Ethan did. He leaned forward and read the heading. "Secured Family Loan Agreement." His eyes moved faster after that. "This isn't ownership," he said. "No," I replied. "It's not." My father's face tightened. "We didn't come here for a loan." "You came here because Ethan needs documented access to stable support," I said. "This gives him that. It also keeps Cedar and Stone out of his debt exposure." My father's voice dropped. "That's not your decision to make. It's my restaurant." For the first time that night, he didn't answer immediately. Ethan turned another page. The agreement was clean. Temporary financial support. Fixed repayment schedule. No transfer of equity. No voting rights. No claim on Cedar and Stone operations or ownership. If he defaulted, the obligation followed him personally. He stopped reading at the line Angela had placed exactly where I knew he would. Secured by existing personal assets. "What does this mean?" Ethan asked. "It means if you don't repay the loan," I said, "the debt remains yours. Not mine, not the restaurant's." My father finally reached for the pages. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said. "What's ridiculous is asking me to put my staff, my lease, my investors, and my business under your son's creditors because he made another bad decision." A flush climbed up his neck. "You don't get to talk about your brother like that. I get to talk about the risk you brought into my restaurant on a Friday night with highlighted tabs and a lawyer's draft." Ethan kept staring at the clause. "I don't have enough liquid cash for this kind of structure," he said. "I know." He looked up at me. Then why would you even offer it? Because the point was never to help me. My father cut in. The point was to protect yourself. I held his gaze. Yes, that word landed harder than I expected. My father sat back slowly, like something inside him had shifted position. So that's what this is, he said. You want to make us the problem. No, I said. You arrived as the problem. He stared at me. For one brief second, I saw the outline of the old strategy reforming in his face, the pressure, the guilt, the family language he had always trusted. But it didn't come, because Ethan was still looking at the paper, still reading, still doing the kind of math he should have done before he drove down from Spokane. If I sign this, he said, my creditors can't use her restaurant as proof of ownership. No, I said. They'll see documented support. That's all. And if I default, the room felt smaller then. I answered anyway. Then the debt stays yours, and the claim follows your assets. He went very still. My father looked from Ethan to me and back again. The confidence he had carried into Cedar and Stone began to thin. Not vanish, just thin. Because for the first time that night, the cost had moved. Off my table, onto theirs. He closed the folder. This isn't what we came for, he said again. But the certainty was gone now. No, I said. It's what I'm willing to offer. No one spoke after that. At the bar, someone laughed at something I couldn't hear. A server crossed the room carrying 2 dessert plates. The candle between us flickered once and steadied. Then Ethan asked the question that mattered. If I don't sign this, he said slowly, you're not giving me anything, are you? I looked at him. No, I said, and that was the moment the room changed. Not because anyone raised their voice, not because justice had arrived, but because they finally understood that nothing in my life was still theirs to reach into. Ethan read the agreement one more time. Not quickly this time, not like a man scanning for a favorable line or a loophole wide enough to crawl through. He read it the way people read something when they finally understand that the room has changed, and that understanding it matters more than winning it. My father said nothing. That was new. For most of my life, silence from him had meant punishment, distance, withdrawal, a way of making everyone else rush to fill the space he created. Tonight it meant something else. He had run out of language that worked. Ethan set the papers down and looked at me. If I sign this, he said, you'll actually do it. You'll wire the money. Yes, I said. On Monday, through Angela's office, after the signatures are reviewed and the note is filed correctly. My father's head lifted at that. Filed, Angela stepped up beside the table, then calm as ever, the rain-dark collar of her coat still framing her face. Documented, she said. Not filed with a court unless there's a default, but properly executed, witnessed, and enforceable. My father looked at her fully for the first time. And who exactly are you? Someone who reads before signing, Angela said. Daniel was standing near the host stand, not watching directly, but close enough that I knew no part of this room was out of my reach anymore. Ethan looked back down at the agreement. My father tried one last time. This is humiliating, he said. She's turning family into paperwork. I looked at him across the candlelight. No, I said. You did that when you walked in here with a contract. That landed, not dramatically, not loudly, just cleanly. Ethan reached for the pen. My father's hand moved half an inch, then stopped. For 1 second, I thought he might still try to pull rank, try one last command, one last version of, because I said so. But Ethan signed first. Then he slid the agreement back. Angela checked the pages in order. Initials where needed. Signature at the bottom. Clean lines. Real names. Real consequences. She handed the pen toward my father. "You don't need me on this," he said. "No," Angela replied. "But your name is on the original approach, and your pressure created the transaction. If you want any argument later that this was misrepresented to your son, your witness signature helps avoid that." He hated that because it was practical. He hated it because it gave him no moral speech to stand on. After a long second, he signed. He didn't look at me when he did it. By the time they stood to leave, the room had settled back around us. Dessert service had started. The rain outside had softened to a mist. The candle on table 12 had burned low. My father put on his coat and finally looked at me. "You'll regret making everything so formal," he said. I held his gaze. "No," I said. "I'll regret not doing it sooner." Ethan folded the copy Angela gave him and slipped it into his jacket. He looked smaller, standing up, than he had seated at the table. Less like a man claiming something, more like a man realizing he had signed for his own life, at last. Neither of them said goodbye. They walked out through the front door of Cedar and Stone and disappeared into the wet Portland night. On Monday, the funds were transferred through Angela's office exactly as agreed. Ethan's creditors received documented proof of secured family support, and the repayment schedule took effect. He made the first payment 3 weeks later, then another the month after that. Small, regular, undeniable. My father called once. I let it go to voicemail. He said words like fairness and misunderstanding and family. He said I had embarrassed him. He said he never thought I'd become this cold. I listened to the message while standing in the walk-in cooler between crates of kale and citrus and cream. Then I deleted it. By December, Cedar and Stone had its strongest quarter since opening. I hired another line cook. Daniel took over more of the floor on Fridays. Angela came in one quiet Tuesday with her sister and ordered the mushroom risotto and a bottle of Barbera. And for the first time in months, I sat with a glass of water after service and felt something I hadn't trusted in a long time. Not victory, not relief exactly. Something steadier than that. Ownership. Not just of the restaurant, of the silence I no longer owed anyone. A week before Christmas, my father sent a card to the restaurant instead of my apartment. No return address. Inside was a single line in his handwriting. "I hope someday you remember what family means." I stood at the window table and read it once. Then I tore it in half and dropped it into the recycling bin under the hose stand. Outside, the street was wet and bright under the lights. Inside, every table was full. I turned back toward the kitchen, where my life was already in motion without him. If you've ever had to choose between peace and family, I'd love to know what that looked like for you. If this story stayed with you, a like or subscribe helps more than you know. And if you want one more story about dignity, justice, and starting over, the next one is waiting.